The stars looked different from the bridge of the alien ship. Captain Dong-Su pressed his face against the cool metal of the viewing port and watched Earth grow smaller behind them. 3 days ago, he had been eating breakfast with his wife in Seoul. Now he was traveling faster than light toward a space station that most humans did not even know existed. "Captain, we are almost there," said Ambassador Kale. The tall alien moved with fluid grace across the bridge. His skin looked like polished silver and his eyes were too large for his narrow face. "Kepler Station will be visible soon." Dong-Su nodded and straightened his uniform. Behind him stood his small team of 4 soldiers. Lieutenant Jin-Ho had been chosen for his experience with special operations. Sergeant Min-ji knew more about explosives than anyone in the Korean military. Corporal Tae-jin could speak 6 languages and learn new ones in weeks. Private Yu-jin was only 22, but had scored higher on adaptation tests than anyone they had ever seen. They were humanity's first representatives to the Galactic Defense Coalition. The weight of that responsibility felt heavy on Dong-Su's shoulders. "There," said Kale, pointing ahead. "Kepler Station." The space station was enormous. It looked like someone had taken a dozen cities and welded them together in a spinning wheel. Lights flickered across its surface like stars. Ships moved in and out of docking bays that could hold entire Earth fleets. Dong-Su had seen pictures, but the reality was overwhelming. "How many species are represented here?" asked Lieutenant Jin-Ho. 47 in total," replied Kale. "The coalition includes every major civilization in this part of the galaxy. Except humans, of course, until now." The docking process took an hour. The station's gravity felt normal, but the air carried strange smells. Dong-Su caught hints of ozone, flowers he had never encountered, and something that reminded him of the ocean after a storm. Their escort met them at the airlock. General Vorth stood nearly 3 meters tall and appeared to be made of living crystal. Light moved through, his body in slow waves. His voice sounded like wind chimes when he spoke. "Welcome, humans. I am General Vorth of the Silicate Defense Corps. Admiral Nexus is waiting in the command center." They walked through corridors filled with beings Dong-Su had never imagined. Creatures that floated rather than walked. Others with too many arms, or eyes in places where eyes should not be. Some looked almost human while others defied description entirely. All of them stopped to stare at the human delegation. "They are curious about us," observed Sergeant Min-ji quietly. "They are wondering if we are worth the trouble," corrected General Vorth. His hearing was apparently very good. "Humans are unknown quantities. Your planet was isolated until recently. We have no data on your military capabilities." The command center was a vast dome filled with holographic displays. At its center stood Admiral Nexus. She was even stranger than General Vorth. Her body seemed to be made of colored gas that held a humanoid shape. When she moved, parts of her trailed behind like smoke. "Captain Dong-Su," she said. Her voice sounded like it came from everywhere at once. "Ambassador Kale has told us much about humanity. We hope his faith is not misplaced." "We are here to help defend against the Void Swarm," replied Dong-Su. "Our planet may be small, but our soldiers are capable. We shall see." Admiral Nexus gestured to the displays around them. "The swarm has consumed 12 star systems in the past year. They adapt to our weapons faster than we can develop new ones. Their hive mind learns from every encounter. We are losing." The holographic displays showed the devastation. Entire worlds reduced to empty husks. Space battles where coalition forces were overwhelmed by enemies that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. Dong-Su felt his team tense behind him as they watched civilizations die. "What do you need from us?" asked Lieutenant Jin-Ho. General Vorth's crystal body flashed brighter. "First, we need to know what humans can actually do. Your technology appears primitive compared to our standards. Your weapons are chemical-based projectiles. Your ships cannot manipulate space-time. Your soldiers have no telepathic abilities or enhanced physical modifications. However," added Admiral Nexus, "Ambassador Kale insists that humans possess unique qualities that statistics cannot measure. He claims you have something he calls adaptive resilience. We have designed a test to evaluate this claim. She waved. Her gaseous hand and a new hologram appeared. It showed a large chamber filled with swirling energy and impossible geometry. The Nightmare Protocol, our ultimate training simulation. It combines every challenge our forces might face against the Void Swarm. What kind of challenges, you may ask Corporal Tae-jin. Physics that change without warning, replied General Vorth. Gravity that shifts in all directions. Temperatures that fluctuate from absolute zero to stellar core heat. Time distortions where minutes become hours or hours become seconds. Admiral Nexus continued the list. Psychological warfare designed to exploit deepest fears. Pain amplification that makes minor injuries feel like mortal wounds. Reality distortions where up becomes down and solid becomes liquid. The simulation is designed to break soldiers within hours, added General Vorth. It pushes beings to their absolute limits and beyond. No species has ever completed more than 3 consecutive runs without suffering permanent psychological damage. Private Yu-jin stepped forward. What happens if we fail? Then humanity returns to Earth, said Admiral Nexus simply. We cannot afford to train soldiers who break under pressure. The Void Swarm shows no mercy to the weak. Dong-soo looked at his team. Jin-ho's face showed calm determination. Minji was studying the holographic display with professional interest. Tae-jin appeared to be taking mental notes. Yu-jin looked nervous but ready. How long do we have to prepare? Asked Dong-soo. No preparation time, replied General Vorth. The Nightmare Protocol begins in 1 hour. You will face it exactly as our elite soldiers do without modification or assistance. 1 hour, repeated Admiral Nexus. Use that time to say goodbye to each other if you wish. Most beings who enter the protocol are never quite the same afterward. Some never recover, at all. Around the command center, alien officers were placing bets. Dong-soo could not understand their languages, but their gestures were clear enough. They were wagering on how quickly the soft humans would break. Ambassador Kale approached the human team. His large eyes showed genuine concern. Captain, I brought you here because I believe humans are special, but I have never faced the protocol myself. I do not know what it will do to your minds. Dong-soo gathered his team in a circle. They spoke quietly in Korean while the aliens watched. Jin-ho reminded them of their training back on Earth. Minji talked about the importance of staying calm under pressure. Tae-jin suggested they treat it like any other mission. Yu-jin asked if they were really ready for this. We are as ready as we can be, said Dong-soo finally. We came here to prove that humans belong in this fight. The only way to do that is to face whatever they put in front of us. When the hour ended, the human team stood before the entrance to the Nightmare Protocol chamber. General Vorth and Admiral Nexus watched from the observation deck above. Dozens of alien officers had gathered to witness either humanity's triumph or its destruction. Last chance to reconsider, said General Vorth. No shame in admitting the protocol is beyond your capabilities. Captain Dong-soo looked at the swirling energy inside the chamber. Then he looked at his team. They nodded back at him. We are going in, he said simply. The chamber door sealed behind them with a sound like thunder. In the observation deck above, aliens began timing how long the humans would last. Most bets centered around the 2-hour mark. They had no idea what they were about to witness. The world exploded around them the moment they stepped inside the chamber. Gravity pulled Dong-soo in 3 different directions at once. His feet stuck to what had been the ceiling while his head was yanked toward what used to be a wall. The air burned his lungs like acid 1 second and froze them like ice the next. Lieutenant Jin-ho screamed as the chamber filled with images of his family. His wife and daughter stood in their sole apartment, calling for help as flames consumed. Everything around them, the fire looked real. The screams sounded real. Jin-ho ran toward them, but they vanished just as his fingers touched their faces. It is not real, shouted Dong-soo, but his words were lost in the chaos. The chamber had become a nightmare playground where physics meant nothing, and pain was the only constant. Sergeant Minji found herself in a minefield that stretched to infinity. Every step triggered explosions that threw body parts into the air. Children's voices begged her to save them, but every bomb she tried to defuse only created bigger explosions. Her hands shook as she worked on devices that changed their design every time she looked away. The temperature swung from desert heat to Arctic cold in seconds. Corporal Tae-jin tried to call for help, but his radio produced only screams. Every frequency carried the voices of dying soldiers begging for rescue. He pressed the device to his ear until blood ran down his neck, desperate to make contact with someone real. Private Yoo-jin faced her worst fear over and over again. She had to choose between saving her squad or saving a group of civilians. Every choice led to death. Every decision meant watching people she cared about die while she stood helpless. The guilt crushed her chest like a physical weight. In the observation deck above, alien officers watched with professional interest. General Vorth counted down the minutes on his internal chronometer. Admiral Nexus monitored the humans' vital signs through the chamber's sensors. Both expected complete psychological breakdown within the first hour. But something strange began to happen. Captain Dong-soo stopped fighting the impossible gravity and started watching it instead. The pulls and pushes followed patterns. Random at first glance, but predictable if you paid attention. He began moving with the gravity changes rather than against them. Jin-ho, he called during a brief moment when the chamber's audio torture paused. The images repeat every 4 minutes, count the cycles. Lieutenant Jin-ho wiped tears from his eyes and focused. His family's death played out again exactly as before. Same flames, same screams, same desperate reaching. But now he saw it as a pattern rather than a tragedy. By the third repetition, he was studying the hologram's technical flaws instead of drowning in artificial grief. Sergeant Minji made a discovery of her own. The minefield explosions looked random, but they followed rules. Pressure-sensitive mines always appeared in groups of 3. Motion-sensitive devices never placed themselves near each other. She began treating the field like a puzzle instead of a death trap. "The physics here are broken but consistent," she shouted to her team. Broken but consistent. Corporal Tae-jin stopped trying to reach the outside world and started listening to the pattern of screams on his radio. Some were recordings. Others were generated by computer algorithms. A few were real transmissions from previous test subjects. Once he understood the difference, the psychological impact faded. Private Yoo-jin realized that her impossible choices were designed to have no right answers. The simulation wanted her to feel guilty no matter what she chose. Once she accepted that both options would end badly, she could focus on minimizing damage instead of preventing it entirely. The team began, working together in ways the protocol had not anticipated. When gravity shifted, they moved as a unit. When temperature extremes hit, they shared body heat. When psychological attacks intensified, they reminded each other that none of it was real. 6 hours into the simulation, they completed their first full cycle. The chamber reset itself and began the sequence again. In the observation deck, alien officers checked their timing devices in confusion. "That should not be possible," said General Vorth. His crystal body flickered with uncertainty. "Perhaps their equipment is malfunctioning," suggested Admiral Nexus. But the human vital signs showed stress without breakdown, exhaustion without surrender. Captain Dong-soo stood in the center of the chamber as the second cycle began. This time, when gravity reversed itself, his team was ready. When the temperature dropped to absolute 0, they had already moved to the warmest zone. When psychological warfare started, they began calling out warnings to each other. "Incoming. Family trauma sequence," shouted Jin-ho. "Minefield pattern Alpha 7, reported Minji. Radio screams intensity level 4, added Tae-jin. Impossible choice scenario variant 2, finished Yoo-jin. The second run took only 4 hours. By the time it ended, the humans were tired but functional. They sat in the chamber's center during the brief rest period and shared water from their survival packs. "How are you feeling?" asked Dong-soo. "Like I just finished advanced training," replied Jin-ho. "Unpleasant but manageable. The physics puzzles are actually interesting once you understand the rules," said Minji. "Someone put real thought into making them impossible." "The audio attacks use 17 different psychological manipulation techniques," reported Tae-jin. "Crude but effective if you are not expecting them." "I think I am getting used to the guilt scenarios," added Yoo-jin. They lose power when you realize they are designed to make you feel bad no matter what. In the observation deck, General Vorth and Admiral Nexus held an emergency conference. The humans had not just survived the Nightmare Protocol twice, they had adapted to it. They were learning from it. "Request permission to run it again," came Dongsu's voice over the communication system. Again? General Vorth's crystal body flashed in surprise. "You have already completed 2 full cycles. No species has ever requested additional runs." "We want to see if we can do better," replied Dongsu. "There were several sections where we wasted time figuring out the patterns. We think we can complete it faster." Admiral Nexus studied the readouts from the chamber. Human stress levels were elevated but stable. No signs of psychological breakdown. No indication of permanent damage. If anything, the humans appeared more confident than when they started. "Very well," she said finally. "Third run authorized." The third cycle took 3 hours and 20 minutes. The humans moved through impossible scenarios with growing efficiency. They predicted gravity changes before they happened. They solved physics puzzles while under psychological attack. They supported each other through trauma sequences with casual professionalism. When the chamber finally powered down, the human team emerged looking tired but satisfied. They had completed 3 full Nightmare Protocol cycles in less than 14 hours. Most alien soldiers required weeks of gradual conditioning to achieve one successful run. Captain Dongsu approached the observation deck's communication panel. His uniform was soaked with sweat, but his voice was steady. "General Vorth, Admiral Nexus," he said. "We would like to request some modifications to the protocol for tomorrow's session. We have identified several areas where the challenge could be increased." In the alien observation deck, dozens of officers stared in stunned silence. The soft humans had not only survived their ultimate test, they were asking for it to be made harder. General Vorth's crystal body dimmed as he processed this impossible development. Admiral Nexus's gaseous form swirled with agitation. They had designed the protocol to identify the limits of alien endurance. The humans appeared to have no limits at all. 2 weeks later, the Nightmare Protocol had become something entirely different. General Vorth and Admiral Nexus had modified it 5 times, each iteration designed to finally break the impossible humans. The latest version included temporal, distortions that stretched seconds into hours and compressed days into heartbeats. Captain Dongsu woke at 500 hours and began his morning routine. Physical exercises, equipment check, team briefing, then breakfast. By 0700, his squad was standing outside the protocol chamber, ready for their daily session. "Today's modifications include pocket dimensions," announced General Vorth. His crystal form had grown dimmer over the past weeks, as if the stress of failing to break the humans was affecting his biology. "You will face alternate versions of yourselves with hostile intentions. Also, we have added emotional amplifiers that will turn minor irritations into overwhelming rage." "Understood," replied Dongsu. He looked at his team. They appeared more rested and confident than when they had first arrived at Kepler Station. "Any questions?" Lieutenant Jinho raised his hand. "Will the alternate selves use our memories and training, or are they just physical copies?" "Full memories and skills," answered Admiral Nexus. Her gaseous form swirled with what might have been frustration. "They will know everything you know and use it against you." "Interesting," said Sergeant Minji. "What about the emotional amplifiers? Do they affect decision-making or just pain tolerance?" "Both," replied General Vorth. "Even minor stress should become unbearable. Most species cannot function when their emotional responses are amplified beyond normal parameters." Private Eugene stepped forward. "How many pocket dimensions will we be navigating simultaneously?" "Up to 7 at once," said Admiral Nexus, "each with different physics, different threats, different versions of reality." Corporal Tae-jin made a note in his personal log. "Communication between dimensions possible or blocked?" "Completely blocked," answered General Vorth. "You will be isolated and forced to face your dark mirrors alone." The human team nodded and entered the chamber. In the observation deck, alien officers had stopped placing bets on how quickly the humans would break. Instead, They were wagering on whether the modifications would slow the humans down at all. The chamber activated and reality fractured into 7 pieces. Dongsu found himself facing a version of himself that had chosen cowardice over courage. The alternate captain wore the same uniform but carried himself like a broken man. His eyes held the shame of soldiers abandoned and missions failed. "You could have saved them all," the dark mirror said. "But you chose the safe path instead, just like you will today." The emotional amplifiers kicked in. Minor guilt over past decisions exploded into crushing self-hatred. Dongsu felt his knees buckle as artificial shame flooded his nervous system. For a moment, the weight of imaginary failures threatened to destroy his will to continue. Then he remembered something Jinho had said during their first protocol run. The system wanted him to feel bad. That was its entire purpose. Once you understood that, the feelings became data instead of truth. In another pocket dimension, Lieutenant Jinho faced a version of himself that had become a killer without conscience. The alternate Jinho had dead eyes and bloody hands. He spoke casually about torture and murder as if discussing the weather. "This is what you really are," the dark mirror said. "Strip away the morality and duty, and we are all just animals looking for excuses to hurt others." The emotional amplifiers tried to turn Jinho's natural aggression into blind rage. But he had learned to recognize artificial psychological manipulation. Instead of fighting the anger, he channeled it into focus. The rage became fuel for determination rather than destruction. Sergeant Minji encountered a version of herself that had failed to save her squad during a bomb disposal mission gone wrong. The alternate Minji was covered in the blood of her teammates, weeping over bodies she had been too slow to protect. "You are not fast enough," the dark mirror whispered. "You never were. Today someone will die because you hesitate for just 1 second too long." The emotional amplifiers magnified her fear of failure into paralyzing terror. But Minji had spent 2 weeks learning to function while afraid. Fear was just another environmental condition now, like extreme heat or impossible gravity. In his pocket dimension, Corporal Taejin faced a version of himself that had become lost in languages and cultures until he forgot who he was. The alternate Taejin spoke in a mixture of tongues, his identity scattered across too many worlds to remain coherent. "You collect other people's words because you have none of your own," the dark mirror said. "You are empty inside, filled only with borrowed thoughts and stolen phrases." The emotional amplifiers tried to convince him that his adaptability was weakness rather than strength. But Taejin had learned to value his flexibility during protocol training. Being able to change was not the same as having no core identity. Private, Yujin found herself facing a version that had been broken by impossible choices until she could no longer make any decisions at all. The alternate Yujin sat paralyzed, weeping over every path not taken and every option not chosen. "Every choice leads to suffering," the dark mirror said. "The only way to avoid causing pain is to never act at all. But then people die from your inaction instead." The emotional amplifiers turned her natural empathy into crippling guilt over every decision she had ever made. But Yujin had spent weeks practicing with impossible choices. She had learned that sometimes there were no good options, only necessary ones. 4 hours into the session, something unexpected happened. The humans began reaching across dimensional barriers that were supposed to be impenetrable. Dongsu's voice somehow carried into Jinho's pocket dimension. Minji's hand signals became visible to Taejin, even though they occupied separate realities. The protocol had not anticipated this level of team coordination. The emotional amplifiers began to malfunction as the humans supported each other across impossible distances. The pocket dimensions started to blur together as human determination proved stronger than alien technology. By the end of the session, the team had not only survived 7 simultaneous pocket dimensions, but had found ways to help each other despite complete isolation. They emerged from the chamber tired but unbroken. "How did you communicate across dimensional barriers?" demanded General Vorth. "We did not need to," replied Dongsu. "We know each other well enough to predict how each team member will respond to specific threats. Coordination does not require communication when you trust your squad completely. Admiral, Nexus reviewed the session data with growing disbelief. The emotional amplifiers registered maximum output, but your stress responses remained manageable. How is this possible? The amplifiers work by magnifying existing emotions, explained Lieutenant Jinho. But after weeks of training, we have learned to recognize artificial emotional manipulation. Once you understand that the feelings are being imposed from outside, they lose most of their power. Sergeant Minji stretched her sore muscles and checked her equipment. The pocket dimensions were creative, but they still followed rules. Different rules than normal reality, but rules nonetheless. Once we figured out the patterns, navigation became routine. The alternate selves were psychologically interesting, added Corporal Taejin. Whoever programmed them understood human psychology quite well, but they were still just computer programs running predictable scripts. Private Yu Jin made notes in her personal log. The impossible choices were more complex than previous versions, but the underlying logic was the same. Except that some outcomes will be bad, minimize total damage, move forward without dwelling on what cannot be changed. In the observation deck, alien officers discussed the session in worried tones. The humans had not just adapted to their most advanced psychological warfare techniques. They had begun to enjoy the intellectual challenge of overcoming them. General Forth called an emergency meeting with Admiral Nexus and the coalition leadership. The Nightmare Protocol had been their ultimate measure of military potential. If humans could treat it as routine training, what did that mean for the war against the Void Swarm? Sir, said Captain Dong-Su as the team prepared to leave. We have some suggestions for tomorrow's modifications. The temporal distortions could be more complex, and the pocket dimensions could include multiple alternate selves instead of just one each. Admiral Nexus stared at the human captain with something approaching horror. They were not just surviving impossible challenges, they were asking for harder ones. The coalition had created the Nightmare Protocol to identify the absolute limits of military endurance. The humans seemed to have no limits at all. Day 21 began like any other for Captain Dong-Su. He woke at 500 hours in his assigned quarters aboard Kepler Station. The artificial gravity felt normal now, and the recycled air no longer carried strange alien scents. Everything had become routine, including what the coalition still called their ultimate training challenge. He performed his morning stretches while reviewing the day's protocol modifications. Today would include reality phases where solid matter became liquid. Liquid became gas, and gas became something that had no name in any human language. There would also be probability distortions where unlikely events became certain, and certain events became impossible. Sounds interesting, he said to himself while pulling on his uniform. Lieutenant Jinho was already in the mess hall when Dong-Su arrived. The younger officer had adapted well to alien food, though he still missed kimchi. He was reading technical specifications for the day's challenges, while eating something that looked like blue eggs but tasted like chocolate. The probability distortions should be fun, Jinho said without looking up. I have been wondering how they would simulate impossible luck scenarios. Sergeant Minji joined them carrying a cup of coffee-like beverage that the station synthesizers had learned to make for humans. She had requested access to the protocol's technical manuals and spent her free time studying the engineering behind impossible physics. The reality phase shifts are elegant, she said, sitting down with them. Whoever designed them understood quantum mechanics at a level that makes human scientists look like children playing with blocks. Corporal Taejin arrived speaking what sounded like a mix of 3 different alien languages. He had been practicing with some of the station personnel and was becoming fluent in dialects that most coalition members could not even pronounce. Good morning, he said in perfect standard coalition. Then he repeated the greeting in silicate crystal harmonics and ethereal gas whispers. I learned 2 new curse words yesterday. Want to hear them? Private Yu Jin was the last to arrive. She looked tired but determined. The impossible choice scenarios had been getting more creative each day, and she had been staying up late developing new decision-making frameworks to handle them. Ready for another day of the impossible becoming routine, she said, settling down with her breakfast. They finished eating and walked to the protocol chamber like office workers, heading to another day at their jobs. Along the way, they passed alien personnel who stopped to stare. The humans had become something of a station legend. the beings who treated the Coalition's ultimate test like morning exercise. General Vorth and Admiral Nexus were waiting in the observation deck. Both looked tired. The stress of repeatedly failing to challenge the humans was taking its toll on the Coalition leadership. Today's session includes 17 new impossible scenarios, announced General Vorth. His crystal body flickered weakly. We have added time loops where you will experience the same death repeatedly, memory wipes that will make you forget your own identities, and pain amplifiers that will make every sensation feel like being burned alive. Understood, replied Captain Dong-Su. Estimated session length? Unknown, said Admiral Nexus. Her gaseous form swirled with agitation. These modifications are beyond anything we have previously tested. Some scenarios may continue indefinitely until psychological breakdown occurs. Or until we figure out how to solve them, added Lieutenant Jin-Ho cheerfully. The human team entered the chamber and the session began. Reality immediately became fluid. Dong-Su found himself walking on water that turned to fire under his feet, then to ice, then to something that felt like walking on music. The sensation was disorienting for exactly 30 seconds before he began to recognize the patterns. Jin-Ho experienced his first-time loop death by falling off a cliff that appeared without warning. Then he experienced it again, and again. By the 5th repetition, he was studying the cliff's formation to understand why it appeared in that specific location. By the 10th, he was using the knowledge gained from previous loops to avoid the fall entirely. Minji faced memory wipes that removed her identity every few minutes. Each time she had to rediscover who she was and why she was in the chamber. But human memory was more resilient than the protocol anticipated. Core personality traits survived even when specific memories vanished. She learned to leave herself notes in places her wiped mind would naturally look. Taejin found that the pain amplifiers made every breath feel like inhaling molten metal. Every heartbeat was agony. Every movement brought fresh waves of artificial suffering. But pain was just another environmental condition, like extreme temperature or impossible gravity. He learned to function while burning. Yujin faced probability distortions where her weapon would jam at the worst possible moment. Her communications would fail when she needed them most. And her decisions would always lead to the worst possible outcomes. But she had spent weeks learning that sometimes there were no good choices. Bad luck was just another obstacle to overcome through persistence and creativity. The session lasted 8 hours. When it ended, the humans emerged looking tired but satisfied. They had not just survived 17 impossible scenarios but had found ways to thrive in them. How? Asked General Vorth simply. The time loops were actually helpful once we understood them, replied Jin-Ho. Each repetition gave us more information about how to solve the underlying problem. Death became a learning experience rather than a failure. Memory wipes cannot remove muscle memory or core personality traits, explained Minji. Identity is deeper than specific memories. We learn to function on instinct until our minds recovered. Pain amplifiers work by overwhelming normal pain management systems, added Taejin. But humans can learn to compartmentalize suffering. The pain was real, but it did not have to control our actions. Probability distortions follow mathematical rules even when they create unlikely outcomes, said Yujin. Bad luck clusters around specific decision points. Once we mapped those points, we could plan for the worst-case scenarios. Captain Dong-Su looked at his team with pride. They had taken everything the Coalition could throw at them and turned it into educational experience. What modifications are planned for tomorrow? General Vorth and Admiral Nexus exchanged glances. They had spent weeks trying to break the humans with increasingly impossible challenges. Each failure only seemed to make the human team stronger and more confident. We are considering ending the protocol testing, admitted Admiral Nexus. You have exceeded every parameter we established. There is no challenge left that we can present. With respect, Admiral, said Dong-Su, we are just getting started. Each session teaches us something new about adapting to impossible conditions. We would like to continue training. Training, repeated General Vorth. The word seemed to pain him. You call the Nightmare Protocol training. What else would we call it? Asked Private Yujin. It presents problems. We learn to solve them. We get better at handling similar problems in the future. That is the definition of training. In the observation deck, alien officers who had been watching the humans for weeks began to understand something that terrified them. The humans were not just surviving impossible challenges. They were enjoying them. They approached each new impossibility with the enthusiasm of students presented with interesting puzzles to solve. The Coalition had spent decades developing the Nightmare Protocol to identify the absolute limits of military capability. They had created scenarios so terrible that elite soldiers from 47 different species could barely endure them. The humans treated these scenarios as their morning routine. General Vorth began to understand why Ambassador Kale had been so insistent about recruiting humanity for the war effort. If beings who could make the impossible seem routine were fighting on your side, what could possibly defeat them? The answer was becoming increasingly clear. Nothing could defeat them. The question was whether the universe was ready for what humans might accomplish when truly challenged. The emergency alarm cut through the morning air like a knife. Captain Dong-Su was finishing his stretching routine when red lights began flashing throughout Kepler Station. His team had been scheduled for their daily protocol session in 30 minutes, but the piercing siren suggested their plans had changed. All personnel to emergency stations, came the announcement in standard Coalition. The Void Swarm has attacked the Helios system. Repeat, Helios system under attack. All available combat units report for immediate deployment. Dong-Su found his team already gathering in the corridor outside their quarters. 3 weeks of intensive training had honed their reactions to razor sharpness. They moved with quiet efficiency, checking equipment and preparing for combat without wasted motion. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Jinho, "our gear is ready. Full ammunition load, emergency supplies for 72 hours, communication equipment tested and functional. Environmental suits are sealed and pressure tested," added Sergeant Minji. "Explosive charges armed and ready. I took the liberty of adding some modifications based on what we learned about impossible physics." General Vorth appeared in the corridor, his crystal form blazing with urgent light. "Humans, you are being deployed ahead of schedule. The swarm has evolved new tactics. They are using reality distortions and psychological warfare that match your protocol training." "How long until we reach the battle zone?" asked Corporal Tae-jin. 4 hours by fast courier ship," replied the general. "You will be inserted directly into the combat zone with minimal support. Coalition forces are being overwhelmed by enemy tactics they have never encountered before." Admiral Nexus materialized beside them, her gaseous form swirling with agitation. "The swarm has learned to weaponize impossibility itself. They are creating pocket dimensions, temporal distortions, and reality phases that our soldiers cannot comprehend. Many have already surrendered rather than face conditions they cannot understand." Private Yujin stepped forward. "What kind of conditions exactly?" "Gravity that changes direction every few seconds," replied Admiral Nexus. "Temperature, fluctuations from absolute zero to stellar core heat. Time dilations where soldiers experience days of combat in minutes of real time. Physics that obey no consistent rules." The human team exchanged glances. These were conditions they had faced every morning for 3 weeks. "Anything else?" asked Captain Dong-Su. "Psychological warfare beyond anything we have encountered," added General Vorth. "The swarm is projecting trauma scenarios, impossible choices, and emotional amplification that drives experienced warriors to madness within hours." "Sir," said Lieutenant Jinho carefully, "these conditions sound very familiar." "Of course they do," replied Admiral Nexus with something that might have been hope. "This is why we developed the protocol. We suspected the swarm might eventually weaponize reality itself. What we did not expect was finding soldiers who could treat such conditions as routine. The courier ship was small and fast, designed to deliver personnel to combat zones quickly rather than comfortably. The human team spent the 4-hour journey reviewing intelligence reports about the Helios system battle. The information was disturbing. Coalition forces that had fought the swarm successfully for years were being routed by tactics that made no logical sense. Reality itself had become a weapon that alien soldiers could not understand or counter. "Look at this," said Sergeant Minji, studying a tactical display. The swarm is creating localized zones where solid matter becomes liquid, then gas, then something that has no physical properties at all. Coalition forces enter these zones and simply disappear. Temporal warfare, observed Corporal Tae-jin, reading another report. Swarm units are trapping enemy soldiers in time loops where they experience the same death over and over until their minds break. Standard coalition training has no countermeasures for this kind of attack. The psychological components are sophisticated, added Private Yujin. They are not just projecting random fears. They are analyzing each soldier's specific weaknesses and creating customized trauma scenarios designed to target individual mental vulnerabilities. Captain Dong-soo studied the overall tactical situation. The coalition forces are retreating because they cannot understand what they are fighting. The swarm has turned the battlefield into something resembling our morning training sessions. Exactly, said Lieutenant Jin-ho. For them, this is nightmare warfare beyond comprehension. For us, this is Tuesday morning. The courier ship dropped them directly into the combat zone through a method that involved folding space in ways that hurt to think about. One moment they were aboard the ship, the next they were standing on a planet where the laws of physics had gone insane. Gravity pulled in spirals rather than straight lines. The sky was purple one moment and transparent the next. The ground beneath. Their feet shifted between solid rock, liquid metal, and something that felt like walking on crystallized time. Environmental conditions match protocol parameters 7 through 12, reported Sergeant Minji calmly. Recommend standard impossible terrain navigation procedures. Around them, coalition soldiers were in full retreat. Crystalline silicates moved in panicked formations, their normally precise coordination shattered by conditions they could not process. Ethereal gas beings fled in confusion as their environmental suits failed to maintain coherent form in the shifting reality zones. Coalition forces, this is Captain Dong-soo of Earth Defense Corps. He broadcast on all military frequencies. We are assuming tactical command of this sector. All units fall back to safe zones and await further orders. Earth forces? Came a desperate reply from a silicate commander. We were not informed of human deployment. How many ships do you have? No ships, replied Dong-soo as his team advanced through a zone where time moved backward and forward simultaneously. Just 4 soldiers. 4? The alien commander's crystal voice cracked with disbelief. 4 humans against a swarm battle formation? Lieutenant Jin-ho encountered the first swarm unit as they crested a hill that existed in 7 dimensions at once. The enemy creature was something between an insect and a nightmare, chittering in frequencies that were designed to drive listeners insane. It projected a trauma scenario showing Jin-ho's family burning while he stood helpless to save them. Psychological, attack pattern Delta 7. He reported calmly while putting 3 bullets through the creature's center mass. Standard trauma projection, medium intensity. Not very creative compared to protocol standards. Sergeant Minji found herself in a localized reality distortion where her explosives turned into flowers every time she tried to arm them. The effect was clearly designed to frustrate and demoralize human soldiers by making their weapons useless. Interesting, she said, studying the phenomenon. Matter transformation field with selective targeting. Definitely breakable if you understand quantum phase relationships. She adjusted her equipment using techniques learned during impossible physics training, and watched her grenades solidify back into functional weapons. The battle continued for 6 hours. What should have been a rout turned into a systematic dismantling of swarm positions by 4 humans who treated reality warfare as environmental conditions to be navigated rather than impossible mysteries to fear. Corporal Tae-jin established communication networks that functioned across dimensional barriers. Private Yujin made tactical decisions in scenarios where every choice led to impossible outcomes, but some impossibilities were more manageable than others. By the end of the day, the swarm forces were in retreat. Their reality-warping weapons had proven ineffective against opponents who had spent weeks learning to function in impossible conditions. How? Asked the silicate commander when the sector was finally secured. Captain Dong-soo looked around at a battlefield where physics made no sense and time flowed in random directions. His team was tired but functional, treating the impossible terrain like any other operational environment. Training, he replied simply. "We have been preparing for this kind of combat every morning for 3 weeks." The coalition forces stared at the 4 humans who had just accomplished what entire battle fleets could not manage. They had not just survived weaponized impossibility, but had turned it into a tactical advantage. In the command ships above, alien, officers began to understand that humanity's greatest weapon was not their technology or their numbers. It was their ability to make the impossible feel routine. 3 months after the Battle of Helios, Captain Dongsu stood before the Coalition High Council in the Great Assembly Hall of Kepler Station. Representatives from 47 different species filled the chamber, their varied forms creating a symphony of colors, sounds, and impossible biology that would have overwhelmed him when he first arrived. Now it seemed as normal as walking through downtown Seoul. Behind him, massive displays showed footage from recent battles across the galaxy. Human soldiers moved through reality distortions with casual confidence. They navigated temporal warfare zones while maintaining normal conversation. They faced psychological attacks designed to break alien minds, while treating them as minor annoyances to be overcome. The integration of human forces has exceeded all projections, Dongsu reported to the assembled representatives. Currently, we have 12,000 human soldiers deployed across 37 combat zones. The Void Swarm has begun retreating from any system where human forces are present. General Vorth, his crystal form now bright with something that might have been pride, gestured to the tactical displays. Human forces have achieved victory ratios that our strategists initially dismissed as impossible. They are not just surviving swarm reality warfare but actively countering it. Admiral Nexus added her observations, her gaseous body swirling with satisfaction. The Nightmare Protocol has been redesignated as the Human Standard Assessment. What we once considered our ultimate training challenge is now the baseline requirement for human military personnel. In the displays, footage showed human training facilities across the galaxy. New recruits from Earth were learning to navigate impossible physics, temporal distortions, and psychological warfare as part of their basic military education. What had once driven elite alien soldiers to madness was now considered entry-level training for human cadets. Lieutenant Jin Ho has established the first multi-dimensional combat school, continued Dongsu. He is training coalition forces in temporal warfare techniques. Progress is slow, but some species are beginning to adapt to human training methods. The footage shifted to show Jin Ho working with a group of silicate warriors. The crystalline beings struggled with time loop scenarios that human trainees completed on their first attempt. Their precise logical minds had difficulty accepting the fluid reality of temporal combat. Sergeant Minji has developed new weapon systems that function across multiple physics frameworks simultaneously, reported Dongsu. Her engineering teams have created equipment that remains functional even when matter itself becomes unstable. On screen, Minji demonstrated a rifle that could fire solid projectiles, energy beams, or temporal distortions depending on local reality conditions. The weapon automatically adapted to whatever physics system it encountered, remaining lethal regardless of how the laws of nature behaved. Corporal Tae Jin has established the Coalition's first truly universal communication network. Dongsu continued. His systems can maintain contact across dimensional barriers, time distortions, and reality phases that previously made coordination impossible. The display showed Tae Jin's communication arrays functioning in battlefield conditions that would have been inconceivable months earlier. Human and alien forces coordinated attacks across pocket dimensions, through time loops and between parallel realities with seamless efficiency. Private Yujin has been promoted to the youngest colonel in Coalition history, announced Dongsu with visible pride. She has developed decision-making protocols that function in scenarios where traditional logic fails completely. Her tactical frameworks are being adopted by command structures across 17 different species. The final display showed Yujin leading a mixed force of humans and aliens through a battlefield where every choice led to impossible outcomes. Her teams moved with confidence through situations that would have paralyzed conventional military thinking. The Void Swarm has adapted their tactics in response to human effectiveness, reported General Vorth. They have begun avoiding direct confrontation with human forces. Several swarm fleets have retreated from systems they had already conquered when human deployments were announced. Admiral Nexus gestured to intelligence reports floating in holographic detail around the chamber. Swarm communication intercepts suggest they classify humans as a Category 12 threat. This is a classification they had never used before encountering Earth forces. "What does Category 12 represent?" asked a delegate from the Aquatic Collective, their translator converting water pressure changes into audible speech. "Unknown," replied Admiral Nexus. The swarm created this classification specifically for humanity. Their previous highest threat, Category was 8, reserved for species that could manipulate space-time on a planetary scale. Captain Dongsu approached the central podium, where coalition leaders traditionally delivered their most important statements. The chamber fell silent as representatives from 47 species focused their attention on the human who had changed everything. 3 months ago, you tested us with challenges designed to identify our limits, he began. You created scenarios so terrible that they broke your strongest soldiers. You expected us to fail, to prove that humans were too weak for the realities of galactic warfare. The chamber remained perfectly quiet. Even species that communicated through electromagnetic radiation or quantum fluctuations had stilled their natural emissions to listen. Instead, you discovered that humans do not break, continued Dongsu. We adapt. We learn. We find ways to make the impossible feel routine. Your ultimate test became our morning exercise. Your worst nightmares became our training scenarios. He gestured to his team, who stood at attention near the chamber entrance. Jinho had developed new training techniques that some alien species were calling revolutionary. Minji had created technologies that functioned in conditions where technology should not exist. Taijin had built communication systems that worked across the boundaries of reality itself. Yujin had been promoted 3 times in 3 months for tactical innovations that alien commanders were still trying to understand. The Void Swarm represents everything the Coalition fears, said Dongsu. They weaponize impossibility itself. They turn reality into a battlefield where normal thinking fails and conventional tactics become meaningless. They defeat you by making the universe too strange to comprehend. He paused, looking around the chamber at representatives whose species had fought the swarm for years without meaningful success. But humans have never lived in a universe that made sense, he continued. We evolved on a planet where survival required adapting to constant change. Our history is written in responses to impossible challenges. We do not expect reality to be reasonable or fair or comprehensible. We expect it to be difficult, and we have learned to thrive in difficulty. The chamber erupted in a symphony of alien discussion. Crystal beings chimed their thoughts in harmonic frequencies. Gas creatures swirled their opinions in visible patterns. Aquatic delegates created pressure waves that translated into excited commentary. General Vorth called for order, and the chamber gradually quieted. Captain Dongsu, the Coalition has a question that has been discussed extensively in private sessions. We need to understand the true scope of human capabilities. Admiral Nexus rose from her position among the gas-being delegates. Our tests were designed to find your breaking point. 3 months of combat deployment was meant to reveal your limitations under actual battlefield stress. Neither approach has succeeded in identifying human limits. The question, said General Vorth, his crystal form flashing with urgency, is whether humans have limits at all, and if you do, whether the universe itself is prepared for what humans become when those limits are finally reached. Captain Dongsu considered this carefully. Around him, representatives from 47 species waited for an answer that might determine the future of galactic civilization. The question was not whether humans could help win the war against the Void Swarm. That had already been answered. Tihar. Question was what would happen after the war was won. General, Admiral, distinguished representatives, he said finally. I think the real question is not what happens when humans are truly challenged. I think the question is whether the challenges we face are big enough to be worthy of human potential. Looked out at the assembled delegates, beings whose civilizations spanned thousands of years and whose technologies could reshape reality itself. They had created tests designed to break the strongest minds in the galaxy. They had built weapons that could destroy star systems. They had fought wars across dimensions and through time itself, and they were all looking to humanity for answers. "Kyat the Void Swarm will be defeated," said Dong-su with quiet confidence. "Not because humans are stronger or smarter or better armed than they are. We will defeat them because we are comfortable with impossibility. We do not need the universe to make sense in order to function within it. But after the swarm is gone," he continued, "humanity will still be here, still adapting, still learning, still turning impossible challenges into routine exercises. The question you should be asking is not whether we can handle whatever the universe throws at us." He smiled, thinking of his team and the thousands of human soldiers now deployed across the galaxy, treating weaponized impossibility as morning training exercises. The question you should be asking is whether the universe is ready for what humans will accomplish when we stop being defensive and start being creative. In the Great Assembly Hall of Kepler Station, representatives from 47 advanced civilizations contemplated a future where the beings who made impossibility routine were no longer fighting for survival, but actively shaping reality according to human imagination. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. The greatest HFY tale was not about humans conquering the impossible. It was about humans making the impossible feel ordinary and then looking around for something truly interesting to do.